Dr. Emily Wakild, you are back. God bless you, woman. How are you?
I'm doing well. How are you, Matt?
I'm good. As always, we're having far too much fun before the cameras got rolling.
That's right. So much good things to talk
Yeah,
about.
good times, good times. Last time you came on, we did the Naming Idaho episode where we really dug into, well, besides Napoleon Dynamite, dug into some of the origins of how we got names, what was important to those communities like the Lewiston community or Lewis and Clark, things of that nature, because we have, in Idaho, we have that real history of the Oregon Trail and exploration and things of that nature. There is more of that to be talked about. Obviously, we have the Frank Church Wilderness, and we have things that Idaho has determined are really important for its identity. And part of that is our public lands. And there has been a large conversation, obviously, with preserving public lands as of late because of things going on in our federal government. But that obviously betrays the fundamental point of why these things are so important to us, right? Like how they're part of our culture and our history. And you being a historian agreed to come in and talk about it.
Absolutely. Yes. I am always happy to nerd out over public lands and to think about really, I think what it is there's these tensions between American values that seem like they're polar opposites, but really it's the tension that gives us the richness that we have come to appreciate in a place like Idaho. So for example, you think about something like private property, right? Baked into the Constitution, fabric of most of our banking systems, the entirety of how people generate wealth and have really this sort of cultural idea of themselves. So private property is just a bedrock in the US, probably more than any other country in the world, right? But at the same time, 1 out of every 3 acres across the nation are collectively held. Right? They're in the public domain. They belong to the federal government or the state government in some cases. 635 million acres in the federal estate, 200 million in states. So the feds own 3 times what the states do, but collectively, 1 out of every 3 acres. And I think those things exist because of each other, not in competition with each other. And so we can have private property and we can have this ownership over things that are our very own as an individual or as a family, because we also have this safety valve, right? We have this public access to more than you or I can afford. And by having that, especially in places like Idaho, especially in the West, that's part of what gives us such a great quality of life. And I think it's taken for granted. And I think in particular, people that are kind of new to the area think that it's always been that way and it will always be that way, even though they might support, sure, give the land to the states. That'll be a better way of dealing with it. Or sure, let's use it for unhoused people. And that would be a, great idea. And so I think it's worth kind of looking backwards in order to look forwards to think about how these lands came to be collectively held and what that means and what it means for you and I, but also what it means for what we expect of the government or what we expect of kind of each other. And so because there were such deep debates this summer about in the budget bill, the tax and spending bill, those things over what to do with public lands and how to do it. I think it's worth sort of thinking about the scale and thinking about the resource outlay and just and reflecting on what a great benefit to a place like Idaho having public lands really can be.
Well, I mean, I'm all for this. And specifically, I didn't understand the scale and wealth of lands that Idaho had before I moved here. I just didn't. I didn't know a lot about Idaho. I knew it had great river systems. But then coming to understand that they're a dear friend of mine, a good friend of mine, told me that he moved here when he was 40. He's an older gentleman now.
Yeah.
Moved here when he was 40. And he was all I wanted to do was work and go hunt and fish. That's it. Yeah. That's it. And that was his thing. And I've heard many people since then talk either in a contemporary standpoint. It's look, all I do is I make enough money so then I can go hunting, or that was what their jam was, maybe until they had kids or something. But that's, if that's what you want to do, then this is the place for you. Right? There are very few places like Idaho that, first off, we have a quality of life that's great, and we have a low cost of living that enables people. It's you can take a 2 or 3 month job, get that done, And then, if you get part of a union or something, you get rolled over and it's like, great, no problem. I'm going to go on and take, several months off for this season. I also know many people that essentially like stop their work for hunting season, and then they like take these huge swaths of time. And some of them had made jobs around doing that. Like it's a couple friends I have in the wildlife conservation arena literally are like, hey man, I'll do this thing for like 9 months, but when this time frame comes around, I'm gone. Like I'm gone somewhere else doing, and it's wild that really is part of the wealth of Idaho.
It is. And they're not alone in doing that. So Yvon Chouinard, the founder of Patagonia Clothing, and Doug Tompkins of North Face famously were like, okay, I'm going to take vacation for 3 months a year and you'll have to run my company without me because that's what I need to do for myself, right? So I think part of that, and I remember in high school, we got a week off in October. It was elk season. Why would we go to school?
Oh
right?
my God. I got to start doing this. So, I got to start taking weeks off. Like this is Matt's week.
And that's part of that tension. Like the U.S. has a culture of work that is particularly predominant in urban areas, but it doesn't necessarily dominate everybody's lives. And I think that's an important thing to remember when thinking about the cadence of rural life that is really different and is really seasonal and intense in particular ways across the seasons too. And that accounts for the sorts of rewards that public lands really deliver to people's freezers and their hearts and all kinds of things.
Right, their soul.
Their blisters on their feet, all the things.
All the things. I think you and I touched on it, that like the culture I came from was really one of work. Like you're getting to work, and you're getting to work out of, that's just what you did, and out of survival. Because like if you're not working, you're not making it happen in that space. And I'm really trying to shed myself of that habit and that propensity to just grind. Because if I don't, I get like this itch, like I get anxious. And it's not even that I'm like, oh yeah, makes me so happy. It's that I get anxious, that it's like, look, if you're not moving forward, you're like sliding backwards. You gotta be working like crazy. And again, as I spend more time with people, very successful people in the state, and see them be like, no, I'm gone for the next 5 days. Even though this big thing, I had a friend recently who, is a person of consequence, and this big thing happened that related directly to her and directly to her field. And it disturbed her plans a little bit. Like I think she left a day later, but she's like, no, I'm still leaving. I'm still going off into the wilderness, and there's nothing that's going to stop me. And it was like, God bless you. And it's like, you could have picked no greater, traumatic or important moment for her professionally. And even with that, the people around her engaged in her association as well were like, okay, great. Yeah, no, like we'll catch you, like just do this thing and then like get out, grab your backpack, get out of here. Yeah, man, I see people leading the way and kind of like setting the example for me.
Well, and, so Cecil Andrus, Idaho's only 4-time governor, elected by a higher percentage of the population in each of 4 decades across the 20th century, only more popular as he got older. But he used to say, first you have to make a living, and then you have to make a life worth living. And what he meant by that was you got to pay the bills, right? You got to do something that allows you to do it, but that can't be the only thing. And he was a logger, right? Him and his father and his brothers worked in northern Idaho off timber concessions from national forests. And so he's a great example of the ways that public lands have been used for resource extraction to build economies, right? And to allow people to make a living. And he also talked a lot about having a second paycheck. And his second paycheck was filling the freezer with elk or with fish and taking his daughters fishing. And that second paycheck was also provided by those public lands, but it wasn't just a paycheck, right? It was the leisure time and the recreation and the memories and the time spent with the people he loved in the places that he loved. And I think so many Idahoans relate to that. And they can see how they want their lives kind of built around those principles that yes, you have to make a living, you got to pay the bills, and they only get bigger. But you also have to have this life worth living. And what does that mean? And for most of us, that means having access to the things that make us whole and that give us pleasure, whether that's hiking and mountain biking and bird watching, or riding a motorcycle and, throwing a fly line and doing that in your spare time and sharing with that around each other. And there's a intangible nature to that I think is hard to describe and hard to put in sort of legislation. But it's really true. Any sort of public polling that's done around public lands, the vast majority of Idahoans and people across the West value them. Like 2/3 of people say, do not turn federal lands over to the states because they'd be privatized. And if they're privatized, that means you and I lose access to them. Right? And something like 90% of people say, no, don't get rid of national monuments. Don't, sort of de-gazette things and make them smaller. And they're overwhelmingly popular. And so it's somewhat puzzling that this comes out as an idea, because it's also a tiny little fraction of what the national budget is. All of the federal public land agencies make up 1/4% of the federal budget in any given year. And we get so much out of that for so little outlay. I mean, it's equivalent to like 100 fighter jets, right? and it's land that once it's gone, it's not coming back, because the way it got here was episodic and serendipitous and unintentional, but also really structured in a way to provide intergenerational benefits for the future.
Man, you make a living and then make a life worth living. Mm-hmm. That is really puts into words a concern I've had for a long time about the life, even the life I was living previously. And I remember telling my students one time, when I finally told them that I was moving, and they were like, why? And I'm like, well, because I have like best friends in Idaho. I've just never met them. Right. I was like, but I know they're there. Right. And like, I went down this funny exploration of like, look, the only reason I'm here is because I've always been here. That's the only reason. It's not because this is producing the best life. It's not that this is producing the best life for my children, which I can conclusively say it absolutely was not. And especially in the situation I am now, like I've never seen my kids happier, and they've never been happier. Like there's this whole, I told my students at one point, I was like, I have the adventure of my lifetime waiting for me. I just need to go have it. Right. And that life worth living is something that is not a part of the world I came from.
Right.
It was make a living, right? Live, right? Figure out a way to exist in this framework. And like, I'm not saying there weren't positive things. Like I was so proud when I was able to purchase a house in the Bay Area, the astronomical cost, right, of doing that. I was like, I did it, right? Like that was a success. And it's like, I was so proud when I was able to, do whatever, just exist there and feel like I've made it. I made my way in this crazy world. It's kind of like the articulation you have of like New York or Philadelphia. It's like, is it going to eat you up? Right. Yeah. And it's this culture of like battle. It's like you're battling with like this crazy society and this crazy world and all these hard forces, and like only the mighty and strong like survive. And you have this kind of like kill or be killed, successful Darwinistic pride that you're like, I made it here. Right. Yeah. But that was your life. It was not like, hey, this is a life worth living. It was this challenging kind of competitive aspect. And like, look, my wife and I are competitive, challenge prone person. Like, okay, great. Like we can do it. But it was never a life that we were like, this is the life worth living. And just hearing that, it's like, yeah, man. Yeah. Like, yeah.
Yeah. Exactly.
It's like, it almost brings a tear to my eye. It's like, yeah, like that's kind of what I've started feeling in this state. And for instance, I went, a friend of mine took me rafting recently, and I was like, this is awesome. I can't believe this is 30 minutes away from my house. Like the wife and I go home. We're like, how do we get a boat? Like we need to get a raft. So like, where are we going to store it? They're like, and it's like, now it's like, oh, well, we have a place to store it now. We recently moved to like a little hobby farm. It's like, okay, these are things like we now are in a position to build a life around these incredible outdoors and build a life that's filled with this adventure, that's not career oriented, that's not challenge oriented in that way. It's like, no, we could take a week off and go do these things. And, understanding that, yeah, I'm late to the game, right? Like I didn't get it. But again, understanding this, like, yeah, but that's the beauty of Idaho.
That's right.
Like that's what you can pop in anytime, man. Don't be stupid.
We'll be
Take
here.
a PFD. But you get to start popping in and experiencing this thing, and it's still here for us. Right? Like that's the thing. It's been preserved in spite of people like me who don't know it was here. It's like, no, but it's been getting preserved. That's kind of what I think what you were talking about with the structure. It's like, it's this very specific structure so that whether or not you take advantage of it, it will be there when you're ready.
That's right. Yeah. And the structure of public lands and the way that they are managed supports all of those things, whether or not we recognize it or not, right? And so it supports individual rafting trips and runs by people like us, but it also supports amenity-based economies, and recreation is an economic driver in ways that timber and mining were 100 years ago. And it doesn't get enough credit for a number of reasons. But it contribute. I mean, outdoor recreation as a whole is an industry that's bigger than the pharmaceutical industry and the airline industry and all these other things combined. But it does not have a lobbying arm. And it does not have kind of a unified purpose because it's disparate, because it's your buddy with the rafting company, because it's a mom and pop store in Smith's Ferry that's been there for 30 years, because it's, an upstart guy that's selling fancy bikes in downtown Ketchum. And all of those don't see each other as part of the same industry, but they very much are, and they exist because they have consistent and standard and universal access to public lands. And so do their consumers. And because that industry is able to pop up here and there and be related to larger changing dynamics, right? We could also think about Idaho's brew pub industry and wine industry as recreational, right? So you go out for a mountain bike ride, and where do you go afterwards? You go downtown, you go to 10 Barrel, or you go to Payette, and right? Like that's recreation.
Yeah,
that's having a life. And so like there's all of those sort of smaller things that if you take away the public lands, you take away the ones that have access for people that are 30 minutes away, you make those private, because that's what turning them over to the states would be, because the state's not going to put in the budget in order to manage those. They're going to sell the ones that are most valuable. People from Texas and New York and California are going to buy those, and then we're cut out. And that may not happen tomorrow, but that will happen in our lifetime if they're decommissioned and they're sort of sold off in a mandatory fire sale. And that has ripple effects in the way people live. And those things are not what we come to Idaho or choose to live in Idaho for. That might be what people in Texas or New Hampshire want, because that's what they're used to. New Hampshire and Texas don't have public lands, right? They're not surrounded by these amenities and that access. And so it's normal to them to see a no trespassing sign or a fence, or, to know they can't just ride their bike until they reach a trail. But that's not what Idahoans have built their economies around, and it's not the way that we have existed in tandem with this federal presence in these lands. And it is by no means a perfect system, and I would never argue that. There are tons of tweaks, there are antiquated laws, there are permit systems that need reconfiguring, and there's sort of a whole 21st century overhaul that could be used. But let's do that. Right. How about we invest in that instead of saying, well, they're broken, let's auction them off and see what billionaires want to put up fences on them. And that would impoverish it for all of us. And that's I don't think something that Idahoans are interested in.
Oh, yeah, I very much agree. And the concept of just articulating that something is broken, it to me has really become very, very curious, because when I dig in, I had this great conversation with one of the reps over the legislative session. It was somebody who was very, very critical of the public education system. Okay, no problem. Like, I want to know about it. And part of the conversation with him actually was like, okay, if we could make a list of all the things that are broken with the Idaho public education system and deliver it to Superintendent Critchfield, if we could do this, let's do that today and say like, hey, if you fix these 5 things, I will not feel like the system is broken. right? And it was, again, great conversation, but I couldn't get a single one out of him. I was like, is it like the bathroom issues, or is it test scores, right? Is it, culture, like all of these things? Like, tell me what exactly is broken that you don't like, and tell me what metric you would use to gauge its brokenness, or conversely its functionalness. Let's figure that out and go from there. And when people say similar things about like, oh, the public land system is broken, or like the management is broken, it's like, okay, what exactly do you mean? Right. And
Right.
Can we look at perhaps an action that you feel is a broken action is in part actually a functional management project? That's not to say that the federal government manages our lands within the state of Idaho correctly all the time. Like, that's not it. Absolutely. But it is a big question, which is, okay, you do realize that burning some fuel, like there's a reason they're not going to put out every single fire instantaneously. Right.
They used to. That's why we're in the situation we're in, right? That's exactly right. That was the policy for 80 years, and it's not anymore. And so, yeah, I think that's exactly right. And this is where my lens as a history nerd, right, it comes into play. And it's like, well, the pattern that we have now was not people sitting around a table with the map and saying, this is where we'll put national parks. This is where we'll put private land. This is where we'll put forests. That's not how the designations and the jurisdictions that exist were put into place, right? They exist in time and space, and they happened with the political exigencies at the time. And the pattern that evolved was not one that you or I would design if we sat down today with the knowledge we had, but it's one that we've inherited by all those decisions of the people that came before us. And there are all sorts of really interesting geographical and environmental constraints on that happen in the West in particular. And I think it's worth sort of understanding what that means for the patterns that are there. So, like, for example, when people moved from east to west and Europeans settled Oregon Trail and otherwise, when they came to places like Idaho, they settled around water. And then they began claiming private land around water. And so you take a place like Idaho, and the pattern that exists is almost all water access, wetlands, and places with access to water are private. They're not part of the public domain because that's where people could make a living, right? That's where they could build a farm. That's where they wanted a homestead. And so the water access was gobbled up first. And the places that were left over were less economically viable for a particular kind of agriculture and farming. And so those were left in the public domain. They were never part of the state. The state could have taken them upon statehood in 1889 and 1890 and chose not to, right? So there's no returning it back to the state. They were not in the state's hand. The state didn't want them. There was no water. And so the aridity of the West was a really big part of how this land ended up in federal hands. And the federal government's policy for most of the 19th century was to give land away and to get rid of it.
That's the whole far and away Tom Cruise.
That is exactly. All of these.
Do you like my
metrics.
hat?
Yes.
Say you like my hat. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. And that was the disposal was the main federal policy from Alexander Hamilton and Thomas Jefferson through the 1890s, right? And then utter disgust for what disposal gave people emerged, right? Americans were disgusted at what happened in the Midwest when Wisconsin was entirely clear-cut because the lands were privatized. Americans were disgusted when the bison, the buffalo, were decimated down to their last numbers, and that passenger pigeons that used to be so numerous, they block out the sun. They were entirely massacred, right? And had no place to roost and were killed. And Americans were like, wait a second, there's limits to the earth and we should think about how to make them. And so you get this really creative set of public policies that start in the 1890s, early 1900s. Included in them is national parks, but lots of other things like national forest management, the Weeks Act, the Lacey Act that protects the bison, all of these ideas that were people collectively saying, wait a second, if these are resources that we share, maybe we should come together and protect them collectively. And maybe privatizing everything doesn't actually get us the best systems for the economic survival of smallholders and also things that are non-human like bison and passenger pigeons.
Did you know that the phrase stool pigeon came from the passenger pigeons?
Yes.
Right. It was my understanding, and again, you would be able to correct me, but it's my understanding that in an effort to catch more passenger pigeons, they would essentially put a passenger pigeon tied to the leg onto like a kind of a wobbly stool. And the passenger pigeon would constantly have this movement that was analogous to landing, and other passenger pigeons would see this like passenger pigeon kind of fluttering and landing, and they'd come down and land next to it, big net, grab them, and they just all the time. So the whole stool pigeon is just attracting other idiots around and like grabbing them up. that's a wild time.
Yes, it is. But that's the behavior that what are they called? They're not herd animals. There's a specific word for birds that are like that, because geese do the same thing. And farmers used to tie a goose to the roof of the barn so that the other geese would land in his pond, and then he'd have dinner. And this is how we have geese that love golf courses and city parks, and then others that migrate seasonally. So you have this sort of bifurcated Canada goose population, but it's the stool pigeon thing, because you could
you could attract them into an area.
You could attract them, and then you could shoot them. And in fact, in 1914, the Migratory Bird Act was a way to sort of stop the massacre of birds by using things. So what people would do would attract a flock of ducks or a flock of geese or pigeons, and then dynamite them, right? And kill them by the thousands until the populations crashed. And so there was the Migratory Bird Act was a way to say, well, maybe that's a little much.
Yeah, right.
You can shoot one for dinner, but you can't like dynamite the whole pond.
Right. There's a topic that I'm wading into, which I'm wholly new to, and is related to this in the mineral capture in public lands, right? So you have things like mining operations or natural resources that companies obviously would like to harvest, and it's my understanding that some people are saying, well, look, the sale of these public lands is at least some part motivated by people who want to get access to those minerals, right? And we need minerals, but we also, like, we're articulating errors and crimes of the past of like, hey, we almost decimated the bison and we almost killed all the geese and the passenger pigeons are gone now. Like all these things, like we have these old, horrible stories of what is happening. And even in contemporary Idaho, you see the vestige of horrendous capitalist enterprises that poisoned whole towns, or, the stibnite mine right now is leaching out, I think it's like a proper ton of arsenic per year into the waterway, and there's no fish passage and all these terrible things, right? To what degree do you think that the motivation to sell off public lands comes from people wanting to engage in mineral harvesting? And to what degree do you think that argument would be weakened if we had a more appropriate mechanism to engage in mineral harvesting that prevented poor environmental damage, that prevented horrible outcomes like we've seen, but enabled the utilization of those resources for the betterment of the United States?
I think you're really onto something, and I think that that's exactly right. The policies that we have not been updated for the current mineral needs and demands of the future in all kinds of ways, right? So that's true of critical minerals, cobalt and lithium, but it's also true of the way gas leasing takes place and sort of larger mining. Most of the legal apparatus for mining came into place for gold, which is, of course, why Idaho exists as a state, right? Because of gold mining. And that still happens, still necessary. But it's one in a vast array of sort of mining enterprises that happen, that take place mostly on public lands and mostly far outside of the public's understanding or recognition of how they support our economy and really make up every electronic gadget that we have, but also have sort of lasting effects that we can't entirely account for. I mean, Idaho has Superfund sites that are bigger than any in the country. And so those are very much a legacy of mining. And
could you explain Superfund sites?
Yeah. So a Superfund site is a site that's designated by the federal government under NEPA and environmental laws, the Clean Air Act and the Clean Water Act of the early 1970s, as a exceedingly toxic site, and one that has to be rectified. And usually Superfund sites are turned over to the federal government because the companies that produce them can't afford the kind of cleanup that needs to occur. And the type of cleanup depends on the type of hazardous waste that's in there. So lead is one that throughout central Idaho is important sort of toxic, and lead has known effects, developmental effects on children, and toxic in all sorts of ways. But there are lots of different ways to become a Superfund site, but it is this national designation, and then there is federal budget that goes to cleaning them up. They are controversial and have been controversial within Idaho because it's like getting a scarlet A on your forehead, right? Nobody wants a Superfund site in their backyard, then they can't sell their house or raise their children the way they wanted to. And it also comes with it this sort of baggage of Uncle Sam telling us what to do with our cleanup. But they have been a really important tool for really lightening and lessening the burden that communities have felt in Louisiana and Texas and places that have really large petroleum manufacturing sites, and both air and water quality has been over years just really sort of decimated. And but that's an example of a legal tool that exists, but that's almost as old as I am. Right, and could use some updating in order to allow for the kinds of minerals we need in our economy, while also providing communities with the security that they're not going to be poisoned as an after effect of that economy. So the processes for extracting minerals and mining on federal lands are exceedingly complex, especially if you take into consideration the sort of coastal shelves that are included in the federal patrimony of public lands, and then all of the mineral rights that exist beneath the lands. And they're an really important contributor to the economy, and they're sold off in stable, reliable, and guaranteed ways to companies and individuals that want to exploit those leases. And that is also an important subsidy for the public to recognize. So, if you wanted to set up a gold mine in Custer County, then you would go to a BLM auction or a Forest Service auction, or you would put in a permit for a place that you've identified where you would be able to do that. And there's a process for that. Is it the most efficient process in the world? No. But it has steps that are transparent and that are available to everyone. So it's not just particular people, but you have to go through those steps. And that reliability and stability has been a sort of booming factor of the mining industry. And it's important to recognize that other interests don't necessarily have the same stability or access to different kinds of uses on public lands. And so the mining piece is almost always an exception in any kind of conservation easement or designation. So mining since 1872 and the Hard Rock Mining Act has taken precedence on a lot of public lands for good and for bad. And that has been stable and reliable and allowed for economic growth. The government gets royalties on that, and we could debate whether those are enough for what the government provides. But it's also important to recognize that the private industry doesn't have to own that land, right? And that would be a tremendous outlay if, in order to engage in mining, you had to purchase the land on which those minerals exist. And that almost never is the case in the western states where the federal government has a huge footprint, and that's in effect a subsidy, right? It can also be a benefit to the public if that means that what happens on those lands is scrutinized and is available for public comment. And so that's an important compromise and an important sort of promise to the public that what happens there is available for the public in order to see.
I thank you for all of that. There are so many aspects of what you said where it's like, okay, we need these things. We can all look back 100 or 200 years and see terrible things, right? And that has scared a lot of people into inaction or scared people or motivated people to fight against reproducing that.
Right.
And it's almost like, yeah, no one is advocating for the mining operations that we had of like 1910, right? It's like nobody's advocating for, corporate mismanagement. And that would all be well and fine if we're like, yeah, I don't care. None of this matters to me. I don't want mining and I don't want extracting, like antimony or whatever it might be, right? Like, okay, I'm good with all of that. But the problem lies on our table, right? Like the problem lies, okay, we still get these minerals. We're just getting them from places that do not have the same environmental regulations. They do not have the same humanitarian regulations. And because of that, it's like, okay, wait a minute. So if I'm actually for Earth and I'm for the environment, I actually have to be against this practice anywhere, right? And I actually have to be for more responsible practice, as you pointed out, in my backyard that I can regulate. Right. That's actually the answer. Because if it's like, okay, I'm just going to say not here and then take it essentially off the backs of, child labor and destroying the environment somewhere else. It's like, well, then what are you actually doing? That always comes home to roost in some way. I haven't been able to work my way around this and understand, okay, how do we manage this? Right. Like, what is the actual goal then? What should be the goal if we are sitting here in Idaho and you and I are like, okay, we're going to solve this problem. We have these beautiful public lands. Okay. And we don't want those public lands to be destroyed. We don't want human suffering. We want good, ecological situations, like the whole bit. But we also need these things. Right. And we have these things. We have these things available to us if we unleash a portion of our capitalistic system onto them. And it seems to me that the real answer would be that, like, if you and I are solving this, we go out to every single mining operation that we can get access to and say, hey, what would it take? Hang with me. What would it take for you to come to Idaho, abide by all of these rules on the public land, have people give you all kinds of help, but you then supply the United States with something that I can look down at my phone or look at my computer and be like, okay, you did the right thing. You purchased this thing that is not engaging in slave labor or destroying the environment. The cost is, of course, slightly greater monetarily. The cost is, of course, time, energy, and the potential for a problem in my backyard. But the world cost is far less because we're not destroying other countries. We're not like, there's this whole concept of the mineral high ground where it's kind of like, I want to be morally righteous for these minerals, but only with a geographic constraint. Like, I want moral defensibility only if it's in my backyard. But if you look at me from like across the neighborhood or across the state or the country or the world, I'm a terrible person, but I want moral defensibility right here in my own backyard. And it's almost like, okay, this is bleeding its way into this public lands commentary because there is so much need for us to start really taking a hard look at where are you getting the things that you fundamentally cannot exist without? Like, that's the whole nature of critical minerals that I did not understand until recently. It's like, okay, they have to be either absolutely irreplaceable for our economic or our defense capacities, and we don't have them right now. That's what makes them critical. You can have something that's absolutely necessary, but we have access to it. So it's not critical. It's like, no, that's just copper or that's just whatever it is, right? Yeah. But if it's critical, if we absolutely need it and we don't have it, that's when it's a big problem. And we source, or the people that we buy these from source them from horrendous situations across the world. So it's like, okay, isn't it isn't it like an American value of independence and self, direction for us to be able to find these things and take care of this ourselves in an American manner? And having our public lands maintain maintain in like the public ownership, but also get access to these things and everybody work together. It's like those two things are not mutually exclusive.
That's right.
Right? People have been articulating like, these are our lands. You can't do this to our lands. It's like, well, how are we going to exist in a defensible position? You're like, I can't have a phone that's made by a 6-year-old. Right.
Right. Yeah. Well, and I have lots of colleagues much smarter than I am on the mining topics that you should talk to and that could say a lot more. But my understanding is also that reclaiming all of the copper that's already been extracted is the best bet for security in the future.
Sure.
Right. And that so much of what we need has already been plucked out. We just don't reuse it in a way that is economically viable. And so figuring out what the incentives are in order to reclaim those minerals and reuse them rather than toss them out or need a new phone,
Right.
every year or whatever it is. So reducing the
iPhone 27 is coming out.
Yes, exactly.
I don't need, I stopped getting it's like the whole, did you see the new iPhone? Right. I stopped listening to that probably 4 years ago. I'm like, no. This bad boy is good enough. It's good enough.
Absolutely.
I don't do any updates.
Yes.
I don't buy any new apps. I'm like, this bad boy functions the same way it did 4 years ago when I purchased it. And it's going to stay that way. Like, I never do updates on the computers. I'm like, I know my iPad asks me every day to do an update. I got that bad boy in 2017. I'm like, I'm never, ever, ever updating
Yes.
this. Because I know
working.
Yes. You're going to keep working and you're going to be just fine.
Yes.
It's got like a 64 gig, storage. They're like, but you could get a terabyte. I'm like, I don't care. I don't need a terabyte of pictures because it always just comes down to pictures. So my entire iPhone's taken over by pictures. I'm like, I don't
Yes.
need this stuff. With problem of reclamation and essentially recycling, right, at an industrial scale, it's my understanding that one of the problems is that the things we need now are not the things we needed at the turn of the 20th century. Like, we may have needed a lot of copper or steel or iron ore, whatever it might have been. And I'm not saying we don't need those things now, but the industry that we're developing and the inputs that we need are different now. For instance, in the turn of the 20th century, when we were leading the world in kind of power generation, we had crude oil and we were developing, coal and all of these things, right? That really led us through the first two world wars and made us kind of this powerhouse. Obviously, that was the nature of the end of World War II. We're we have so much power. We made the best bomb that has ever existed in the world, right? We have power in the United States. We need now uranium and thorium. And these were not things that we needed in 1920, at least nowhere near the same scale we do now. So, the number of semiconductors, the amount of, all of the critical minerals sound like something out of a comic book. I can't even say them. It's one is gallium or something. It's I don't even know. I have no idea. But it turns out.
Aluminium.
Yeah, right. Adamantium from the X-Men. But it turns out and asking somebody about this, they're like, yeah, that mineral is used for solar radiation shielding. So if you want satellite technology to not get fried up in space, or if you want to send space shuttles up there, you need that thing. Now, that may be something that we didn't need 70 years ago when we were extracting copper. So it's reclamation. But we also have different industries. We have different power generations. We have without satellite technology for cell phones, we're all donezo. Nobody's making it back home. And it's so we need both of it is what I'm saying.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Yeah. And I think that that's really sort of a great poster for investing in science and figuring out what the minerals are and what their applications are and how those can be used the most efficiently and effectively, and what their trade-offs are. I mean, I think helium's a really great example of something that was used for all of these important military technologies, and then to fill balloons at kids' birthday parties and just let them, and now it's oh no, we're almost out of helium. What are we going to do,
I remember reading about that 10 years ago. I was like, you got to be kidding me.
Yeah.
I was sucking that stuff down at Applebee's, making a stupid voice. And now
and now it's gone.
Yeah. And that's used specifically for almost absolute zero, essentially science, right? It allows you to freeze things down to just as close to zero as you can get.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely.
Dude, how wild.
Yeah.
Like, I should have been a scientist. Like, this stuff is so crazy to me.
It is.
So
It's
coming
like
back to
magic.
public lands, I mean, we have this incredible history with recreation. We have this incredible access to resources with them. We have a very, very rigid standard now in the United States, and for having clean environments there. If they're sold off, if we lose these, we not only lose like this gigantic piece of our history, but we also lose these fundamental, either say in how it's manipulated, access to the resources for the federal government. Like, they could give out contracts like, yeah, but then you got to sell it directly to us. There are plenty of cases of, for instance, uranium. There was a company that had the rights to this uranium reserve on the East Coast somewhere that got sold to Russia. So it's like now Russia, in effect, owns those uranium reserves because it owns that company. It's like we really risk all of these things being utilized, selling off private land that has mineral resources that can get utilized outside of the United States. But if it's a public land, if it's owned by the public, then they have the power to be like, no, yeah, you can go get this, but it has to be like, this is the contract involved here.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's right. And I think what's so interesting about the landscapes of our public lands is there are so many different uses that are not all compatible, right? But they all exist in tension with each other. And the trade-offs that are made over time and space, over what gets priority over particular things. And this happens in every administration. This happens in every decision. And that sometimes there are grazing rights that are preferred over mineral leasing. And maybe you don't want the grazing right on top of the oil. And so one of them has to wait or has to go somewhere else.
Right.
And these are the sorts of decisions that competent, professional, everyday bureaucrats that could be doing things to make lots of other money are doing because they care about these places and because they also want to make a life, right? And so they choose to be in the position where they're weighing in conversation with municipalities and economic interests or with state legislators what should be done at a particular time. And those decisions are not flippant. They don't wake up one day and they're like, hey, should we put an oil drill there? So these are things that happen with a very slow process. And because of that, they have been stable and secure and able to support all kinds of different uses over time. And it's in that great diversity that there's so much security in these lands, especially security for the things, like you were saying, we don't know we need yet. And those things might be camas root and chokecherries and chucker hunting, right? And filling our grocery stores and our pantries. But they also might be these minerals that we don't know what we need them for yet. And if we pave it over or take it out of what's collectively held and that patrimony, then it's not up to us. And there's insecurity in that decision. And once it's gone, it's not going to come back, right? This is an endowment that was put into place because of the way that history played out, and it's not going to play out the same again. And there are very few places in the world that have such a rich resource space that is there for the public. And as a nation that cares about private property, that values its independence, we also have this enormous legacy that's tied to our interdependence and the ways we relate to each other and rely on each other in order to build our communities and to sustain ourselves and move forward. And I think that we undersell that interdependence by thinking we can all just be, who we want by pulling ourselves up. And that's never really been the case. But it is more and more the case because we have these public goods and we have this shared and collective responsibility to take care of them and to make sure that they're not just one thing. And by making sure they're not just one thing, by making sure that multiple use is the way that they're managed, lots of people don't get what they want, right? All the time, but many of them get what they want some of the time. And that's a balance. And there's nothing sexy, beautiful, wonderful about talking about the middle, right? And talking about compromise.
Listen, you don't have to tell me. I am well aware of the middle.
Yes. Yeah. But it's where we need to be. If we want to think about the landscapes of public lands, I like to think of them as a window. And they're a window that if we look at it in the right light, it reflects back on us and it tells us who we are, and we can see who we are as a society in that reflection. But if we look at it in a slightly different light, we can see through it, and we can see the future, and we can see what we want to become, and we can see the things that we need to be responsible for and take care of in order to have that future. And if we break that window, right? If we're not taking care of it and we're not looking at ourselves and thinking about who we are, and we're also not planning for that future, then it all kind of breaks down. And I don't want that to happen. I think that we're better than that. And I think that there's just a tremendous amount of benefit that comes from this world that has this wonderful endowment before us.
Man, you're better than that. I had this... Oh my God, I'm a terrible person. I used to date this girl in college. We'd always get in fights, and it would be like, you're better than this. And it's like, oh my God.
Don't say
it's like,
that.
Listen, I'm not a very good person. I wouldn't put it above me. I'm not better than anything. Trust me. And I think in talking to all, I had a gentleman in who was representing the Idaho guides and outdoorsmen, right? And I didn't know what outfitters were, right, until I moved here. I'm like, wait, so you just have people that you know an area really well, and then they guide people through that area. And with all of the uses of the public lands, it appears to me that the public lands with the rivers and the hunting and all the, it's like holding them in public makes essentially like a marketplace of activity.
It does.
Right. Absolutely. And it's like, in the marketplace, not everybody always wins, not everybody always loses. A lot of people have activity and they can win, but if it's sold, it's like that market's closed. There's no more push and pull. There's no more negotiation. There's no more, people getting all kinds of these benefits from it. But if it's held, it's like, okay, you got like the outfitters, and you got the guides, and you got the recreationists, you got the hunters, you got the fishers, you got the industry, you got all of these different things that you got the taxpayer that's benefiting from leases. You got the ranchers that are making food. You got like all of these things. And it's this giant, messy kind of market of multi-use insanity that, is benefiting. When people say it benefits so many people, it's like, like a lot of hikers. It's like, no. It's so many different industries. That's why, at least in part, people talk, it's like, it's 100x return. If you hold this, whatever the cost is, it's like $1.6 billion, but it returns over $100 billion. And it's because so many industries benefit from the existence of it. And if you take that marketplace away, the outfitters don't have somewhere to go, take people. The hunters don't have places to go. The people selling all the equipment to both of these people don't have anyone. Like Polaris goes out of business, It's just like the sky falls, it's terrible. And it's preserving that marketplace so we can keep engaging in it.
That's right. And I think it's not just if that goes away, but if you don't fund the agencies, if you don't staff the agencies, if you don't have professional people working there, then it falls apart because your rafting guides don't get their permits, and then they can't bring people in, and then nobody eats at the restaurant, and then and it's this cascading. And so there's the concern that the overall efforts to turn federal public lands over to the states, right? That was tried this summer. Thankfully, people showed up and fought against that, and it didn't happen. But the next layer is to stop funding them and to not staff them and to not have people in that office to grant the permit or the lease or whatever it is. And then it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. It's like, oh, the public lands don't work. They don't serve anybody. They're not doing their jobs. And that's not inevitable, right? That's very easy to fix. Back to your list of demands that would sort of make it better, right? Like that is identifiable, and that can be fixed. And we've pushed against that before. There certainly are ways to fix that. But the other argument that comes there is like, oh, they're broken. We should probably sell them, right? And that benefits some very wealthy people. And then they would buy them up and they would put up fences and do not trespass. And then they would get to raft whenever they wanted and it wouldn't be us. But that's the inevitable piece of it. This idea of returning them back to the states. First of all, the states never own them. If anybody gets land back, that would be the Native American people that were here and thinking of these as homelands and using them well before states came into existence. But the states never had the land. So you can't give back something that was never part of a state apparatus to manage them. The state did get endowment lands, and those endowment lands are super important. In fact, they fund education in the state, and their main purpose is to maximize the amount of money they make for education and other purposes that are in the state constitution. So we can go pick huckleberries on endowment lands. We can use them for certain purposes, but that's not why they exist, right? Like parks do, national parks do, or BLM. The endowment lands are to maximize revenue for the state. And the state got those when Idaho became a state. But it didn't have these other lands. The federal government didn't occupy them and take them. Like this idea that that's how it happened is a complete misrepresentation of history. And it's a bait and switch. I think we should feel cheated when people are saying, yeah, give them to the states. They'll manage them better. There's no evidence that could ever exist. The costs of fighting wildland fire alone would bankrupt the states if they took that on in these places. And so the idea that that is somehow going to solve a permitting problem is throwing a axe at a wound that needs a Band-Aid. And the Band-Aid is funding the agencies and hiring professionals to run them as we know can work.
I don't live in the community anymore, but there was a community I was living in that has this gigantic community clubhouse, right? Like huge pool, gym, coffee shop, the whole bit, right? And I've started kind of thinking about why is it that we have this thing within the state of Idaho that like we couldn't take care of? It's like, well, because it's the clubhouse, because everybody gets it. So everybody chips in, whether or not like, and I didn't ever go there, but like part of my dues went to maintaining that thing. Now, if I took that over myself as one person in this community, I would go bankrupt just trying to maintain it. Like I don't have enough money for the pool guy, the pickleball courts, the this, the that, the other. Like I don't have the capacity to maintain it. But because everybody gets access to it, everybody chips in on it. And that's ultimately what comes down to with these public lands. It's like people in Virginia are chipping in because they get to use it if they want. People in Boise are chipping in because they get to use it. Nobody's required to use it, but we've agreed that we're going to hold these things for everybody's benefit. I just happen to live next to the clubhouse, right? But that doesn't mean that I should all of a sudden get to take over the clubhouse. I just happen to live next to it, right? Like that's literally what it is. Okay, well, it's because I share a fence with it doesn't mean it's mine or that it should be returned to me. It was never mine in the first place, right? It's everybody's, and it just happens to be in my little slice of the world, but everybody gets access to it. And that's the benefit of having everybody chip in, that, you know, they have access, they chip in, and we all have this when we want it. So if I want to go do CrossFit or I want to go get, jump the pool, I can do it. I just, I wouldn't be able to do it myself.
That's right. And this idea that like we're paying, it's 7 cents a year. It's an infinitely small amount that people pay for this benefit that is priceless in the memories you'll make with your children, in the ways it benefits your mental and physical health, in what it gives to all of the other non-human beings that benefit by having that open space and that land there as well.
Yeah. Well, in the spirit of making a life worth living, I think we should call it now and go enjoy that life today.
Yes.
It's fantastic.
It's not out there, but totally worth it. Agreed.
Yeah, man. I don't know. I started connecting with Susan Buxton, the director of Parks and Rec. And, I took this trip with her down to Thousand Springs, and on the way back, we were just talking. There were a bunch of people in the car, and I was chatting with her about it. Just at the beginning of the summer, like it really struck me. It's like, hey, look, man, you're like this concept of working, like you got to take a hard look at this, because you know this of yourself. Like, you are just like this V12 engine that just wants to hum at 6,000 RPM. And it's like, you don't have to do that. And like, yeah, you can if you want to, but only if you don't do it just because you've always done it. Yeah. Which is how most of us live our lives. Like, I'm doing it this way because this is the way I've always done it. It's like you have the chance to not live that way. You have the chance to be, you know, the family and the dad and the like that has these, it's like, I want my kids growing up being like, oh my gosh, my dad always blank, blank, blank. And I don't want that blank, blank, blank to be, he was always working.
Right.
Right. I want the blank, blank, blank to be, he was whatever's awesome. I don't know, whatever.
Wearing cool hats.
Oh my God. God bless it. Dr. Wakild, thank you for coming in today.
Absolutely. Always fun to talk to you, Matt.
Every time you come in, it's like, God bless it, man. I get inspired.
Oh, that's super sweet.
Yeah. What classes are you teaching at BSU this year? In case anybody listening wants to check out one of your courses.
Yeah, I am teaching one of my favorite classes, which is Animals in History, or Animals in Time and Space is what it's actually called, which is a super cool tour of the globe, thinking about how people have lived with and thought about and studied animals in different contexts. So we start with the Pleistocene, big extinctions of large animals, and then we go all the way up to the present, circling the globe twice and thinking about extinction and invasion, nature and culture, and modes of production and interaction, everything you can think of, hunting, domestication, parades, Disney films, like you name it, like how people have thought about animals. Yeah, it's one of my favorite classes to teach. We set up game cameras and track some animals, and then they do research projects in a particular animals. So I tell the students, this is not the class that will get you a job, but this is the class you can only take in college, and it will change how you think about the real world around us. And that's kind of the point.
Could we do a show on that in the future?
Oh,
I would
absolutely.
love to start picking off, and like, even if we just wanted to say animals in time and space in Idaho, right? Like what Idaho used to look like, what it looks like now, what it may look like in the future. I mean, I was chatting with somebody just the other day about bears. Right. And how bears are thought to be this like mountainous creature. But in reality, they were very much a plains animal. And we just pushed them into the mountains, and they existed there, and fine, they made it. But that's not where they were originally from. Right. In fact, that film, Leonardo DiCaprio, The Revenant, right? Eats the liver, sleeps in a horse. He had to sleep in a horse to get the Oscar, right? Like he did so much, and he never got the Oscar. Yeah. Yeah. Oh my gosh. But that story was actually based on an experience of an individual. I think it was in the plains. I can't remember if it was like Illinois or something, but he got attacked by a grizzly bear on the flatlands of the United States, not in the mountains, right? And yeah, he did survive and like, crawl back. But that's something that, again, as we see animals, right? It's like they're only in the current iteration with the number and the species available and in their habitats largely because of us, because of our interaction as another animal that's, pushed them and they pushed us and all of these different things. But that's something to really consider, which is like, look, what's the natural state, right? Like, stop talking to me about the natural, like we've already affected all of these things in the way we view these animals. So
yeah. I've got a great colleague down in California, right? Because the grizzly used to be all over California. And
golden bear, right?
Yes, that's and so but he has this great thing where he talks about how there is thinking that the California grizzly was a different species than the grizzly that's in Yellowstone. And now the new thinking is they are the same. And so the California grizzly is not extinct. It's just on vacation in Montana. Right. And so making a play on that sort of dynamism. But grizzly is a great charismatic animal example. But we talk about the mosquito too. Deadliest animal in history, right? Killed more humans than any other animal. And it's because of the diseases that they carry and the way they've affected the outcome of war all over the place. And so they're always there, whether or not we're paying attention.
Dude, the mosquito, and Zika virus. Oh my God, man. Like
dengue and malaria and all sorts of things.
Baddies. Oh my God. Okay, we'll do that next time.
Sounds great.
All right. Thank you for coming in.
Yeah, thanks, Matt.